and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the fourth episode in our ongoing series. For our December podcast, IGS President Lance Strate is joined by four of our fellow trustees, Corey Anton, Nora Bateson, Eva Berger, and Thom Gencarelli. What follows is a freewheeling discussion that took place on December 26, 2022, reflecting on technology and humanity, and that eternal general semantics question, what is going on?
Hello and welcome. This is Lance Strate, and I'm here virtually with Corey Anton, Nora Bateson, Eva Berger, and Thom Gencarelli for something a little different for this month's podcast. Just do an open discussion about the semantic environment and things going on. What is going on here as we draw to a close the year 2022, looking forward to 2023. And Corey Anton is first in the alphabet. And I know you've got a burning issue that's been on your mind, Corey. So do you want to start us off with your A for Anton and A for AI?
I guess I will try to say something there. Thank you, Lance. And it's great to be here with everyone. I would want to frame it a little bit more largely, but yeah, I have been somewhat concerned, interested, alarmed, fascinated by the release of Chat GPT, which I think it's now been out around 3 weeks, maybe a little bit over. And it's hard to tell with the technology such in its infancy. To me, the more interesting question is, what would it take for us to, in a thoroughgoing way, convey how much has changed in the last 200 years? I think the 200-year frame would be the preferred frame for me. If we want to talk about time binding and the human fall into a socio-historical environment, it would be to try to delineate all of the different things that have happened in, say, just the last 200. I mean, I would want, and I think, it's everything from all of the, I guess, changes in family patterns and organizations, but it's also things like the birth control pill, electricity, modern forms of, germ theory, the discovery of the genome, photography, the plane, globalization. I mean, to put it all on the table and just go, what has happened to people in the last 200? And then maybe we could get to GTP.
Well, that's a rather tall order for a single podcast, Corey. But I guess you want to substitute for WIGO, what is going on, WIGO, for substitute WTF, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to get at what's going on. And to try to do it with this, what does it mean to be human, or what does it mean to be in the human condition? I think these have sort of lost touch because we're probably more similar to each other, and we're more similar to people within the last 200 years than any of us are to people largely throughout history. I don't know what people think of all that.
Well, when you said 200 years, the immediate thing that I think about as a person who thinks about media, I went back to 1822. Okay. Well, wait, 1830s. You have the invention of the daguerreotype, which is the beginnings of photography, which forever changes the way we look at ourselves and render, who we are. The penny press is invented, which takes the idea of, these are the things that people who are in the know need to know and should know. And we say, no, let's just get people's attention and let's, buy and sell their attention. And then 10 years after that is the telegraph and Morse code and instantaneity. So, I don't know if you want to go chronologically from, 200 years ago to now, but that sets the table.
Yeah. And he's simultaneously, right? Mendel's doing work on genes, around 1830, around the same time? I mean, the discovery of modern biological inheritance has just revolutionized the way we think about ourselves.
Can I ask a question? WIGO.
Yeah.
What is going on in this conversation is what I'd like to know, because I don't know what the question is that we're asking. what has happened in terms of technology in the past 200 years could be like a timeline, and what do we get out of it? I'm not sure I understand what you're aiming at. And here's sort of more specifically what I suggest as a place where we could start, at least, not go 200 years back. And I don't even understand how you sort of drew the line specifically 200 years ago. But nevertheless, if the trigger for this was AI, as Lance suggested at the beginning, and you said, no, let's speak about it a little bit more sort of openly. How about what we have become and what kind of people we are since the beginning of the computer, or at least the personal computer, or at least the computer since it was connected to the internet. And that would give you a little bit of context to try to understand AI and GPT and other things. Unless I didn't understand and you want to go further back from the computer to other technologies and to other human inventions with a certain sort of agenda or question that you're posing.
No, I think I'm fine enough with the direction you would lean us. I guess I would just, the 200 is obviously very arbitrary. I think there are some significant changes that happened right around the turn of the 19th century. I think that the point would be that, yeah, as you say, that people are significantly different today, and they've been radically transformed. And what would you have to do to adequately convey how that's happened? Like in the same way that's hard to convey to people what life was like before the phone, if they always grew up with the phone, I think sometimes it's a very, very difficult discussion to talk about what's happened to us socio-historically in the way that we relate to one another, the way that we think about ourselves. I think something very significant has happened. And yes, maybe it is more strategic or useful for listeners to focus on the last, what are you going to say, 70 years, 50 years?
Here's what I've been thinking about, where the trigger has been for me as well, GPT-3 and then Chat GPT, and I played around with it. And I find it interesting on the one hand and scary on the other. And I've tried to put together a theory of what it is that this new stage and why it has made so much noise. I mean, there have been other developments that haven't been in the news so much. This has become like this sort of the popular conversation throughout the world. And here's a theory. I haven't really analyzed it very deeply, but it's like at the beginning of what I think may be a theory. And it's based on something I think Christine Nystrom, once upon a time when I studied with her, said, that if you look at the history of the personal computer, it's almost like the history of media in reverse order, or at least from the invention of writing and back. That when we used at the beginning computers and they were managed by like DOS, you needed to be literate. You needed to remember Alt F4 to delete and Shift F3 to do something else. And I think I wasn't the only one with a little note on the side of my computer to remind me what those actions were. You needed some kind of literacy, or at least control of the language that you needed to operate a computer. And then with time and what I think we could call the sort of Macintoshization of computers, or the iconization, we went back to cave paintings and to, instead of pressing Alt F4 to throw out a document, you just dragged the document to what looked like a garbage pail. And you didn't need much of literacy at all, or much less. And then we move on to voice activation and to Siri and to Alexa and back to the development of speech as human beings, where you don't have to know anything but to be able to speak and the computer will respond to you. And based on this idea, I think Chat GPT is like the next stage of our lazy nature, where not only do we want to speak to the computer and have it do things for us, but to do very literate things for us, like write poetry or write papers for school.
Can I just throw one idea into that? That when you say that it's a reversal of media history, this kind of throws it a little sideways. That, remembering Plato writing about Socrates and writing destroying memory. Well, if we're going backwards, yeah, but from the time that Nicholas Carr, said, "Is Google making us stupid?" We've been talking about the fact that we don't need to remember anything. When Corey, you brought up Gregor Mendel before, immediately, here we are on Zoom, and I, went on to Google and I said, let me look up Gregor Mendel and see about, and he was born in 1822, which is 200 years ago exactly where we started. But yeah, we've gone. If writing is going to, if literacy is going to destroy memory, and we're going backwards, that just throws the idea a little sideways.
I would just want to add to that, and I know Nora probably has a lot to say. I just want to real quickly say that, I'm somewhat uncomfortable with these somewhat McLuhan-esque narratives of things going in a direction of re-tribalization, or it seems in some way like there's more of everything. And so, for example, the Chat GPT, it is, I would argue this right now, that coding is not going to go oral. Coding is super hyper literacy, and it's not going away. It may be automated, and it may be that the system is now creating the code and allowing for a more user-friendly form of coding, but coding will never be an oral phenomenon. That'll be my guess.
But it's the book writers that are the coders, not the book readers, if you do the analogy. For readers, so to speak, for the users of the product of the printing press, it was literacy. You needed to know how to read. Coding, I know there have been books that say, code or be coded, or program or be programmed, but we're mostly users of the computer programmed by someone else. So it won't go oral, but the elite will remain literate, the users perhaps not so much.
And also the way in which the press is built, or the way in which the code is coded is not just nothing. It's actually shaping around ideas of a culture, of what are the logical next pathways of sense making and so on. So it's not just code. It's code that is holding culture in it. And this is where the 200 years comes in. Because I think that's an interesting sort of bracket to look at a real shift in the way that people perceive themselves being in the world. And my mother is almost 94. And, when she grew up, her phone number was 9. It was 9. She could call the operator and she could ask where her mother was. The first car that her family had a bucket seat. The iceman would come and deliver a block of ice to put in the ice box, which was the refrigerator. Right. And so her relationship to the quickening of the way that things become more optimized, more efficient, more productive, faster, is really, it really goes way back, right? So if you hand her an iPhone, she wants to know what it's for. And if you give my kids an iPhone, they don't want to know what it's for. They want to know what it does, how they start playing with it. And she's like, but how do I make it be the telephone that it used to be? I remember as a kid being in the room when the phone would ring. Remember this? And it would be like, the phone is ringing, and everyone would be quiet. Right? And then someone would pick it up. And then it would be like, it's long distance. And at that point, everyone in the room was like, frozen. Don't make a peep because it's long distance. And there was some way in which the speed and the abstraction of the communication seems to overwhelm all those communication relationships in the moment that are present and embodied and there. It's very strange. I think the culture's in the code.
And also, let me hold on to your example of the telephone and her reaction when it used to ring. I remember when smartphones and cellular phones began to be more popular and everybody sort of started having one. I remember very clearly one day the phone ringing and I was either cooking or doing something and I just screamed into the house, "Can someone get that, please?" And the answer from my kids was, "But it's not for us." And I remember getting really mad. I mean, you live in this house, the phone is ringing. If I'm busy, you're going to pick it up. But I didn't get mad because that was one of the first signs also of that culture changing that you're talking about, Nora, about sort of individualization and sort of me, right? My phone comes with me wherever I go, and I'm the only one who answers it. And I respect the privacy of others, which meant at that point not to touch anybody else's phone. It's my, your parents and my parents' generation and their relationship with the phone. Some of them didn't have phones from the very beginning of their lives. They came in much later. And it was this magic thing, and it had a special place in the house, and it was the home phone. It belonged to the family, and it was the family's number. And today, I don't think it's even a phone. I think it's a computer, and the last thing we do with it is talk. Most people, certainly young people, don't talk on the phone. It's still called an iPhone, but it's not a phone. Sorry, Thom, I think you were going to say something and I jumped in.
It's okay. No, I was captured by Nora asking on behalf of her mom the question, what is it for? Right. So this conversation, before we actually started the podcast, we were talking about Chat GPT. And at the beginning, I'm the question, what is Chat GPT for? In now and in the longer run, or offshoots of it as we, move forward into this kind of practice and coding practice. Why? For what?
I think that's part of the deal is, I think to invoke McLuhan again, McLuhan has a line, he says, when any technology, as it becomes more complex, it becomes less specialized. And there is this sense in which the Chat GPT is a radical non-specialization technology. That is, it does coding, you can generate video, you can generate text to speech, you can create different code, it can do Python, it can do JavaScript, you do C++. I mean, it's pretty amazing all that it does.
Well, this actually goes back to the computer itself, and Alan Kay, who is one of the pioneers of the graphical user interface, which is, Eva, you brought up the Macintosh, but, it really goes back before Steve Jobs went to visit Xerox PARC and fell in love with what they were doing there. It was Alan Kay's group. And, he influenced by McLuhan, of course, he was influenced by Korzybski also and Jerome Bruner. But following McLuhan, he referred to the computer as a meta medium. Nora, I know we've had some concerns about the use of meta in other contexts, but that referring to the computer as a meta medium, which is to say a medium that takes over all other media, or to use J. David Bolter's term, it remediates all other media. But I would also note, Eva, you said Chris Nystrom referred to as going backwards. This actually is my colleague Paul Levinson, going back to, I think, his doctoral dissertation, but he had his theory of media evolution, where human beings are actually the natural selection or artificial selection for technological evolution. And his idea was that technological evolution works with an anthropotropic principle, meaning that it goes from less to more lifelike or more like human experience, so that we go from black and white to color in images and in photography and film and television, and from mono to stereo and surround sound in terms of sound, so that what's happening both with AI and virtual reality really fits in with that as we try to really get closer and closer. And with voice recognition and voice synthesis, it's kind of bringing us back in that direction. Whereas the trajectory of literacy and by extension coding, which I remember Walter Ong referred to writing itself as autonomous discourse, which coding just extends even further, is not towards the anthropotropic kind of situation, but towards greater and greater abstraction, further and further away from actual human experience. So there.
Yeah, that's good.
I was going to suggest just rephrasing what is the technology for. I think Postman, the question that he suggested we ask is, what is the problem to which the technology is the solution, or what is the question to which the technology is an answer? And he used to talk, he had amazing stories about it. I remember specifically his story about electric windows in the car, that when he went and tried to buy a new car, they tried like to push on him to add money and to get these electric windows. And when he asked the salesperson, what is the problem to which electric windows are an answer, he said, just go away, because he didn't understand. But I think it's a very good question. And if we use it to talk about Chat GPT, what is the problem right now? Why did we need this? What was missing, or what are we released from the moment that this?
I think what's needed, I think the reason this is partly occurring is basically it's a competitive environment where people want to make money. People need gainful employment. And there's all kinds of ways that people are going to be able to see this as they're going to become an entrepreneur. They're going to become a consultant. This thing will take, GPT can take, it can write legal briefs. Now, again, I don't know how well it's doing it right now. It's in its infancy. We'll have to see what it's like 5, 10, 15 years. But it's able to write legal briefs with a history of every legal brief a particular judge has been exposed to. Say you want to get out of a parking ticket, you want to contest some issue, it can create a specialized legal brief for you. Some of the applications are far ranging for accountancy, for like, if you're a consultant right now who does web management or you're going to do things on Twitter and Instagram, people can create virtual chat bots that go on and autonomously like certain things and dislike other things. It automates tasks. The amount of money saving that is going to be there for those businesses who can employ it, it's going to put them at a competitive advantage. And there's just all kinds of marketplace forces that are generating these kinds of technologies. Largely economic would be my own sense. I don't think there's like we could talk about what are the practical solutions of having a better web page, or one that's flashier, or being able to automatically have your emails be corrected and turned into business ease. I think those are like practical improvements, and we could ask, is that really an improvement? Was there a problem? But I think the problem is we're in a brutal market economy of people are broke and they're needing money. People don't know how to make money, and here's how it's going to happen. It's like, I think for some people, they see it as something like a gold rush. There's just endless opportunity for those who get in early. And if you try to get in on this stuff 20 years from now, that ship is going to have sailed.
Do you think this is specific to this technology? Like the idea that it's money making or capitalism at the bottom of this sounds to me like you could say it about almost anything, and certainly any technology throughout history. I think this is making humans much more obsolete than any technology
Agreed.
before, and that it's sort of deeper or more. I mean, I can understand the excitement, but it's depressing to me.
I mean, open source. I'm sorry, Tom. Open source AI has language on its website about guaranteed minimum income, and they're aware of what this potentially is going to do in terms of terminating lots of people's jobs. I think they can smell it in the horizon.
Nora, I can't help but think about that wonderful little anecdote of your father's about the computer.
Yeah, where the man asked the computer, "Do you compute that you'll ever think like a human being?" And the story goes that the computer thumps and it bumps and it spits out a piece of paper. Shows you how old the story is. And on the paper is written, "That reminds me of a story."
Maybe we're there.
We should probably plug that into the Chat GPT now.
Tell us the story.
Well, my stepson, for entertainment, because for the kids right now, this thing is very entertaining. They're plugging all sorts of things in there and seeing what they can get it to create. So one thing they did is they plugged in warm data Nora Bateson, and it produced this little essay that was, pretty nicely written, sounded fine. It was just wrong. But besides the fact that it was wrong, it was actually pretty good. And then he did another thing where he got it to do a short story, and he wrote in warm data superhero, and it wrote a story about Alice. Okay, so it honed into the Alice in Wonderland connection, which is pretty interesting. And it wrote a little story about Alice, who is a warm data superhero. And again, it didn't quite get the point, but it understood that there was something besides numerical measurements. And it was that warm data was about something besides numerical measurements and statistical inputs. And so, I mean, it was a kind of a fun game to play with it, right? Because it's using those type of bits of information. So it was, very telling that it couldn't quite get it. But yeah, I mean, they're playing with it. They're trying to trick it into doing creative things.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that makes me think, Nora, it's that it seemed, and I played with it, a little bit now, and like I asked it to write 1,000-word murder mystery in the style of Agatha Christie, and it was very well written. I wasn't riveting. It was interesting. I asked it to write a poem on the media in the style of Lance Strate, and I sent Lance the poem. I asked it.
It was horrible. I asked it
Korzybski's question. I asked it Korzybski's question: if a pencil is at 64 degrees Fahrenheit, what is the temperature of an electron in that pencil? And it went, that is not a correct question. And it did give the Korzybski response that that's a nonsense question, because you can't specify the temperature of an electron because it has to do with molecules and comparative gradients. I asked it about non-Euclidean geometry, and it was honed in on Lobachevsky, Riemann. I mean, it was very sophisticated. But the more you went into things with philosophy that were technical, where a particular author means a particular thing, it just spit out gibberish. It used common sense, like it probably uses warm and data and just uses all of the different word cluster analysis of those terms, not a specific author's understanding. So I think of Ritzner's book called The McDonaldization of Culture. There's there's going to be a McDonaldization of knowledge, where unless stuff is homogenized and already some way flattened, it's going to be not recognizable to GPT. It's going to be too esoteric or too idiosyncratic or whatever.
So does that mean that our sensitivities then will increase toward the unflat? So will we start to have a sensitivity of this is flattened and this is not flattened? Like what? That'll be interesting.
I think who's the we? I think young people won't. We might be able to see that this is an insufficient essay, but to a young person, they're going to go, it's grammatically correct. It has no spelling errors. What's wrong with it?
Let's hand it in.
Yeah. Did you see the Wall Street Journal had a video just the last couple of days, and they had a woman who went in to try to pass AP English using Chat GPT, and its first assignment was to write, the student's assignment was to write a 500-word essay on existentialism, comparing Ferris Bueller's Day Off of Kafka's Metamorphosis. Chatbot wrote the essay, and the woman got a passing grade on it. The problem was it had some errors about Ferris Bueller. It had confused some of the characters and made wrong attributions, so there were errors, but it was a technically, grammatically perfect paper. And it was comparing these two, a book and a film, along themes of existentialism. It's pretty fascinating. Go see the video.
Proofreading will become an art.
What will?
Proofreading. I mean, just to go over and see that there's some mistakes regarding Ferris Bueller, change those and hand it in, and it's more than a passing grade. But so far, it sounds, Corey, like it's a name dropper, even when it does some good stuff.
What do you mean a name dropper?
A good name dropper, like it takes the words and goes to those authors that are connected with it, and not very much more than that.
I mean, I don't have the knowledge to say this, but I've heard that it's flawless in its English, which it does seem to be, but it's also flawless in German and in Russian.
I want to go back to the part where you said, maybe this generation will be able to tell the difference, but the younger generation won't. And I want to challenge that, because my sensitivities, for example, to spams are much less accurate than my kids. They can smell instantly when something is not real. They're so familiar with the taste, the texture, there's something in the communication that tells them right away, this is computerized information, or this is not real. And where my mother falls for it every time, and I have to, really be sure she doesn't answer those emails. So, I think it could cut both directions.
I mean, yeah, there are stories right now about the menacing promise of GPT for phishing scams, because you can have it, instead of being a bulk mailer just doing phish, you could create a bot that scours, information about a particular person and is designed to, it's like a deep fake and a different kind of technology. I mean, some of these technologies are very frightening. I mean, I think you're right, Nora, that, there's going to be different ways that some people are going to be more attuned to it. There are detectors, for determining whether or not a text was artificially intelligent, produced by AI, and even by particular AIs. Like, there's a whole bunch of them out there. There's not just Chatbot GPT. There's whatever Neuron Writer. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other ones. But I think this issue of, like, if I were to say, like, take a book like Understanding Media or Simmel's Philosophy of Money or Sartre's Being and Nothingness, you'd have to be a scholar who'd spent a lot of time really studying that in order to assess the quality of a chatbot 1,000-word essay. And so that's what I mean by the we. That is, the people who are right now learned are going to be able to go, this is kind of a Mick answer. This is just processed. It's going to be Wikipedia level, maybe have some inaccuracies the way the expert wouldn't accept it. But younger people, they're not going to be able to know the difference between that, because it would assume they're already familiar with the original text.
And I'm assuming
if it's a text that it's writing about.
I think our biases here is very clear. We're thinking of papers, we're thinking of essays. And I have a feeling it's not the most important thing it's going to do. Among other things, Corey, because it's not what makes the most money. As you said before, I mean, it's certainly, probably, at least, going to change the area of, academics and academic degrees and papers and dissertations and theses. But it's probably going to be such a small part of what it does that whether we can figure out that it's flat or that it's not accurate is going to be like soon enough, and I'm glad I'm not going to be around by then, I hope at least, GPT is going to do the grading as well. It's going to be machines reading what machines wrote and not professors reading what machines wrote.
Right.
Because it's, there's already technology to find out what percentage of a paper is original and how much is plagiarized. I think it's going to do much more in other areas. And I guess Nora is right when she says young people are going to have the sort of intuition to feel it or to understand when something's real or when it isn't, or I don't know.
I'm not sure on the exact prompt I used when I typed it into GPT, but I asked it along the lines of what jobs was it most likely to obsolesce or something along those lines. And one of its first identifiers was repetitive jobs in manufacturing settings. So I think GPT is going to be able to be used to create codes and, automated task technologies that allow a displacement of anybody who's doing a repetitive job in a workplace.
Well, I'm going back to Eva invoking Postman. What problem does this set out to solve? And to me, it sounds like, well, it's going to set out to solve all of our problems, right? Again, Eva, you talk about, well, we're talking about papers, and that wound up being your example in what you just last said. And now, Corey, you're talking about industrial practice in an information age. And it seems like this is the supposed solution to all of the things that we might want to do in the coming age.
And this is back to me, this is back to the 200 years ago when we started to try to automate life via electricity. This is the fulfillment of what's happened to people over the last 200.
I think it's a question too of what is real. And you mentioned deep fakes a minute ago. And to me, that's what's really rumbling is, how are we going to know? How are we going to know if this was written by a person? How are we going to know? How are we going to know anything? How are we going to know?
China has a law right now where if you produce anything through a digital content creator and you post it publicly, you have to have a watermark on it that identifies you as the producer. They have laws against producing these things.
I think.
Nora, you think we'll care what is real, or how will we know? Maybe we won't care to know.
Does it matter? Yeah,
I think the idea of fakes, though, is certainly not a new one. And reminds me of, there's a part in one of my favorite documentaries, along with yours, Nora, is the one about Edmund Carpenter, "Oh, what a blow that Phantom gave me." And there's a point where he says there's no such thing as a fake work of art. It is what it is, and not to go against basic general semantics, but it does fit in with this idea in the same sense that true and false only applies to statements created through language or through mathematics, propositional forms in discursive symbol systems. And images are neither true or false. They can be used as evidence to support a claim, but they make no statement or claim in and of themselves. So, in the same sense, what these AI programs are producing, or any kind of virtual recreation or deep fake, is not a fake in that sense. What becomes a fake, and Carpenter's words then are, there's no such thing as a fake work of art. There's only a fake attribution. That is, when the claim is made that this is a genuine tribal art, when in fact it's, tourist schlock, that claim is the fake. And in a sense, that's what's going on with this other material that's being produced, that it's when it's put forth as genuine, that when that claim is being made, that's the problem, which the watermark is one solution to. But Carpenter also has another interesting comment about fakes in that documentary, where he says that fakes are usually become obvious about 50 years after they're created, because when they're created, they speak to the prejudices of their time. And about 50 years later, it becomes apparent that they're not, that they are just made up, that they're playing around. I think that's in the same sense that we're talking about these, that produce something in the style of this person, and then if it's not immediately obvious, it will be even more so obvious later on when people are no longer unused to this sort of thing. Just as maybe, the story is that when film was new, when motion pictures were new, and they projected just the reality of a train pulling into a station, and people panicked and jumped out of their seats because it looked like it was coming straight at them, something that we would, no modern audience would ever do. So we will be forced to adapt to this strange new environment. That's for certain.
Some people don't think it's so strange if you think of NFTs, for example. And why would someone pay so much money for something that you could just print out of your printer at home and put it on your wall, and it would look the same as the original, so to speak, that you paid so much money for, and there's sort of like this type of watermark that makes you the original owner of this thing. There are still fakes, newly defined, but there's still this idea of owning the original.
Or the
something.
NFT.
Yeah.
That's where the NFT thing comes in too.
I think the concern with fake has more to do with like political disruption, ways that foreign governments can infiltrate and create ideological, forms of toxic environments. It's not necessarily, this sort of claim about art. I mean, I think China's banning this stuff because there's a fear of deep faking a political announcement of a, whatever president and creating just, pandemonium.
Which would mean that they're not working on such technology themselves, because once the technology is released, it can be used against their purposes. That suggests a kind of stasis out of it, which I'm not optimistic about.
Well, I think it's just the thing of you don't know who to believe anymore, or what to believe ever. I mean, scientists, are the pharmaceutical people lying? Are the politicians lying? Are the educators lying? Do the tests lie? Do the, are the lawyers lying? Like, how would you know anymore? And I think the preparation for that is on right now. That we're looking at that coming in AI in all sorts of directions, and this chat thing is a warm up. That is pointing particularly at schools and written materials, but what does that do to our social fabric, or to our baseline of how we move through the world when we don't actually know what to believe?
Nora, I was going to ask you, what do you mean when you say the preparation is happening?
Well, we've had about 6 or 7 years now of really sort of whiplashing. This is fake news. That's fake news. This is fake. That's fake. The vaccine is fake. No, the vaccine is real. The fakers are fake. And which is not to say, okay, I'm not naive about this. It's not to say that there hasn't been a whole lot of, if you want to call it fake news, all along. It's that now there's, I would say there's an increase in the discussion of that fallibility, or just the falsehood of it, to the point where it becomes pretty much impossible to know, or even do we care anymore, right? Suddenly the show is about the drama. It's not about what happened or didn't happen. It's about the drama. It's like watching TV. We know it's not real. We just watch it because it's interesting or something. I don't know, but there's some shift happening there that I think in terms of the coming years, there's been a preparation. We are in a preparatory moment for another whole world of deep fake.
This is
I
a
think
great
we're-
point
we're
because
deep-
how much
deep-
easier was it to lie, if you like, or to fake, to do a hoax, 200 years ago, to use that benchmark, when people would say, I believe it when I see it in black and white. And so in the newspapers, you could put in all kinds of things. And then, I mean, there's a whole history of hoaxes where there was those photographs in the 19th century that showed fairies that were just faked. And of course, the War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938. And to Nora's point, we've actually become more sophisticated and more skeptical about these possibilities today. So perhaps that's maybe better, made us more resistant in some ways to being propagandized or manipulated than before.
I guess that's why
the flip side of that, though, and I look at my politics where I am in the world, in the Middle East and in Israel. And the one thing that I have noticed lately is that the archive remembers, and in the internet, you better be careful because everything is kept for years and years. And if you later say the opposite, then they're going to be able to go back and look at what you said then. And they're pulling up stuff that is the opposite of what politicians here are saying now, and nobody cares. It's pulled out of the archive, so to speak. It's, they're reminded, but just 3 years ago, you said the exact opposite of this. And they just shrug it off, and the audience doesn't seem to care. So I don't know if it's better or if we're less propagandized than before. I think we may be so confused and so overwhelmed that we'll end up not caring if it's real, if it's true or not, if it's backed by proof of any sort, and we'll become different creatures.
I mean, that's why I was stopped by Nora's use of the word preparation, because to prepare suggests that we're preparing so that we'll be ready. And I don't see us, not just see us being ready, I don't think we know how to get there, how to become ready, what ready means.
See, I found that interesting as well, Thom. I mean, not only your follow-up, but the Nora's question. And I think of Christine Nystrom's piece on transitional spaces. And it may be that life seems increasingly like a kind of transitional space because of the rate and pace and scope that everything's moving at. And maybe what we're waiting for is something like the return of this sort of paradisical bliss of just living without having to think about the fact of living. The end game is, this is the Bergson's collective unconsciousness. We're going to drift back into it in some way. We're waiting for it to happen. We're it's sort of like nature experimented with an animal that could be, open to experiences of agency and resistance of free will. And it's thrashed around for thousands of years and got more and more power and more self-control and self-awareness. And what it wants more than anything is to lose that state back into the kind of oblivious living that it enjoyed. And it's sort of like ancestral memories that we have,
I mean, it wasn't very long ago, and in fact, it's still true that when you want to show that something is true, you point to the research that proves that it's true. But now when you do that, people will point to 8 other versions of research that say that research isn't true and this other research is true. And, if you are looking to find out, if coffee causes glaucoma, you can find all sorts of studies that say it causes glaucoma. And if you want to find out if coffee cures glaucoma, you can find all sorts of studies that say that coffee cures glaucoma, for example. And this is the thing where I think the younger generation is, they're living in this world, right? Where basically anything you want to prove, you can figure out some studies somewhere and start making a case for it. And that's a different world than I think the five of us grew up in. There was some solid backstop to this. And in hindsight, I doubt it was really solid. In hindsight, we should have been asking who funded this, what were the questions asked, what was on the survey, how'd they do the research, what was the context, etc. But for a while, there was at least the illusion of that backstop. So now we're in a floating world. And I guess the question is, where does that leave us? What happens now in relation to each other, in relation to, actually very serious changes in culture, in climate, in economic? It's very serious changes right now, life and death, political, people talking about nuclear war. Like there's very serious stuff going on. And at the same time, it's, well, that didn't happen. Well, yes, it's like the word gaslighting is just all over everywhere. And so is the word trust. Those two words are just marching all over everything. And their third companion is the word trauma. And we're sort of surfing through this. I guess the other question might be, how do we communicate to each other when something isn't fake? How do we let someone know that something isn't fake? If you say something to someone, or you are feeling something, or you write something, a poem for someone, or whatever it is, how do you actually express that it isn't fake?
You're talking meta communication then. But I think, when you brought up transitional, or when Corey brought up transitional spaces, I mean, the other word there is responsibility. That, and the problem that Nystrom had identified about physical transitional spaces, the bus station, the subway, the airport, is that nobody really owns it. Nobody's there. Everyone's just passing through. So no one feels a real sense of responsibility for the place or for what occurs in that transitional space. And if we're have the equivalent of that, I suppose, in terms of time, that we are always living in a time of transition, then where does the responsibility lie? And this is, ultimately, what's the responsibility for indicating that something is genuine, or something is real and not a simulation, to use an alternate term from fake. Where does that responsibility lie? And of course, an easy answer is that it lies with all of us, but that's, in some ways that doesn't really satisfy.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about this digital age, it was supposed to democratize things. It was supposed to flatten things. It was no more top down, corporate down to the masses. And really, look how it turned out. And all of the folks who, like, Jaron Lanier, who was in at the beginning and, was, a cheerleader for all of that, now looks back and says, wow, how naive we were. As really intelligent people doing really incredible work. Look what we created.
Perhaps we could ask each of us to have some final thoughts on this topic. And maybe Corey, will start with you, since you started us down this rather bleak road. Do you?
Well, again, I would say thank you to the crowd here for the lovely discussion. Really enjoyed it. I think my own sense, not to be, what would you say, overly enthusiastic or overly pessimistic or glum or, ecstatic. I'm just more in a state of wonder about it in its infancy. I think some of the statistics I saw were it took about 4 months to get 1 million users of Netflix, took about a month or so, something like that, to get 1 million users of Facebook. It took 4 days to get 1 million users on Chat GPT. So it's definitely breaking the internet at a very quick speed. And I think I'm not sure, I think some people used to say like 50 years after a technological invention, you have to wait for those 50 years in order to see how it's going to shift everything around. So you're not going to really know when it first hits. So, I mean, we're still in those beginning stages of the cell phone, of social media, of all these kind of things. So this thing, it's not even a month old, so I really don't know what it's going to mean, but my guess is it is going to be such a significant sweeping set of changes. This is going to be a conversation many people are going to be having. And in 10 to 15 years, we're going to look back at this and go, holy cow, we hardly recognize the place now.
Nora?
I think we come back to that story about the computer, and the response of that reminds me of a story. And recognizing that, there was a time in the history of art where it became, the techniques were so perfect that you could hardly tell the difference. The lemon in the still life looked like a real lemon. And something happened there, which was that actually was less information than the information of a more expressionistic, impressionistic, surrealist exploration of lemon. Because those forms of communication and expression had the fingerprints and the epistemological query and the artist and there was all sorts of other information beyond the specific correct detail. And so I think that as we're discussing deepfakes, that's really important. I don't really know what it means or where it goes, but I think it's important to keep that in mind, that a picture of a chair that looks like a chair doesn't have nearly the same amount of information as a picture of a chair that is absolutely somebody's version of a chair. And it's not right or true or real, but it has a lot more information. So I think that's important.
Eva?
I'm encouraged a little bit by Nora's last comments. And I think perhaps for anything having to do with creativity and art, perhaps there not only will we see creative, interesting stuff, but we'll be able to still know the difference between sort of hyper realistic thing and the version of a certain artist. But when it comes to other areas of life where it's important, at least until now, to know if something is real or not, if something is true or not. I am sorry it's good that we're not ending with me, Lance, because I'm gloomy about this. And I think maybe this is what the dinosaur version of the meteorite that destroyed the world once felt like before it came to an end and something else grew out of it. I really think global warming is very real, and you can feel it. It's real, whether you sort of describe it or make talk about it or write about it in a certain way. I mean, you guys in North America are feeling it in your bones these past few days with a cold that is unprecedented. So if we can tell, and if younger generations perhaps, or even our generation, some people in our generation don't think global warming is real, we'll just have to go away for a new species to come about instead of us.
Thom?
So as someone who was schooled on thinking about the communications revolutions, and as a print literate guy who was actually, born in an age of television, right about the time that, television came into its own in US culture. I think that, the first three revolutions of orality and writing and print all brought about great gifts to the species. And then electricity and the electronic comes along and I'm no longer so sure, and I'm kind of in Eva's camp. And so as I'm thinking about what are the game changers of the current moment, because again, that's what we're talking about, Chat GPT as a game changer or the game changer of this very moment. I think about social media, and I think about what social media has done to really hurt political discourse and political practice, and that it's contributed to the rise of autocracy around the world, and people salivating over and eating up propaganda. I've been thinking a great deal about virtual reality, and that after the entire history of the species doing things on two-dimensional surfaces, storytelling on two-dimensional surfaces, that now we're about to enter a world of immersion. And with respects to another game changer, Nora bringing up deep fakes, it's possible that immersion and virtual reality will sort of leapfrog over the problem of deepfakes, because I don't know if you're going to be able to do that in 4 dimensions. And then this, and again, I'm sort of I'm with Eva on all of it. I'm pessimistic about where this takes us. But I've again been pessimistic as I've thought about everything that happened since Samuel Morse and the Telegraph.
I'll add my 2 cents on this. And I was thinking about Edward T. Hall's The Silent Language, where he applies concepts from language, and particularly linguistic relativism, to culture as a whole. And he points out that every culture has kind of 3 categories of, if you like, language communication: the formal, the informal, and the technical. And that and that you could take any particular area of activity, like clothing or cooking or religion, and say, what are the formal aspects, the informal aspects, and the technical aspects. And I think that this technology, that we were talking about, the Chat GPT, particularly exposes the technical qualities of a lot of what we do. That is, if it's possible for the AI to produce a student essay that is equivalent of the essays that we get, then it's exposing the technical quality of what we're asking for, and perhaps suggesting that we should be asking for something else instead of that. Lewis Mumford makes the point that the concept of the machine came before actual machines as gadgets or devices, and that it starts with organized human labor, say circa 10,000 years ago, the building of the pyramids, the creation of armies, and so forth. And then ultimately we just replace the fallible human parts with more reliable non-human artificial parts. And in a way, that's what we're doing with some of these other tasks. That's what automation has been about. So maybe in the end, the question is, does all of this make us, free us up to do more important things that involve the formal and the informal? The AI can do the formal because it is of a form, but it can't, so we could ask the Chat GPT to write marriage vows, for example, but it can't bring in the purpose, the intention, and the feeling of it. And it certainly can't handle the informal qualities, at least for the time being. So does it free us up to really focus on the really human aspects of life, and more increasingly leave the technical aspects to the machines? Or do we turn into more and more like machines ourselves? That was, again, Mumford's fear, that we had returned back to the mega machine, Do we become mega machines or meta machines now under the influence of the AI? And that's really, if you like, the bifurcation point that we're left with at this point. And we don't know which way we're headed, and perhaps to some extent we're headed in both directions at the same time. But we do have some agency in this to decide where we want to put our emphasis and our focus individually and hopefully collectively. I do feel like that slogan that Jacques Ellul's identified with, among others, think globally but act locally, is sage advice for confronting at least some of this. And will we take responsibility? But I want to thank Corey, Nora, Eva, and Thom for taking the time and the responsibility for working on this podcast. This has really been a great discussion, one that we went into in the spirit of improvisation, not knowing where we were going to go, but I think we wound up with something really worthwhile. Thank you all.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was an end-of-year discussion involving Corey Anton, Nora Bateson, Eva Berger, Thom Gencarelli, and Lance Strate, set up especially for our Semantic Reactions podcast. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics, if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's generalsemantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 4th episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.